that's a big deal. It's 617.
Yeah.
But if you go into the building I'm in, there's nothing that says CalEPA or some building anywhere.
Yes. Sorry, I was out of town.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, you said you're out.
So we're good.
Yeah, the 14th?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Whatever time's flexible.
Okay, what is the general time?
We started at 9. Presentation started around 9:15.
Yeah?
Because you have, see, you have this thing called an assistant, and I
Mary will
don't.
be there too.
Okay.
She totally can help with scheduling something.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Like general.
Like, my services are like,
So where we're at, and if you have questions of the members you want to get
Which
feedback
one
on,
is yours, Carol?
Michelle.
just for Mary.
Michelle.
Yeah.
And Carol belongs to?
Karen.
I'll try to think of any other questions that might pop up.
Karen belongs to herself, but she works for Karen. To clarify.
Yeah, I was going to say, that doesn't sound right.
I usually say it the other way. So Michelle,
right.
you're in charge of.
Michelle's in charge of it.
Yeah, I would say the assistant is in charge of
Definitely.
she works.
Yeah.
Well, I was
We'll have a
doodle
people there.
poll, or I had someone send a doodle poll for me to try to get
I think
these
it just
guys
had a few
buy-in.
dates on it though, and I don't know if it's all.
But yeah, no, I'll be there.
Well, it was a complete
Yeah,
failure.
sorry, Hannah.
So
Oh, no,
I was
it's
hoping
been a little
Okay,
busy.
so
I could send over to Michelle and say, here are these people,
that'd be
but I would
perfect.
have to do Rihanna at my calendar, right? Be able to do that? Can she see our stuff?
Yeah, just let me know if you guys can do it.
I don't think so. I have no idea.
All right, I'll send her a note. Or
I
send you a
know,
note.
I see. Hi, Jenny.
A series of times when we're available. See how it goes.
Look, she coordinate with Amanda. Good, how are you doing? Contact. I see. He's got all of you guys on the board here. Michelle was trying to figure out some dates and then Amanda.
Yeah. So then she can send you guys.
Amanda's the one that fired off the doodle poll and then promptly went out sick for the next 2 days.
Oh, she's not on your nice list.
She's on the other list. Well, that's
Pleasure. Who is maybe two? The right person.
Probably he can.
Right. Hey, how are you doing?
We tried.
Hey, Larry.
Hey, there's some new material for that.
Okay.
Like, for like the materials, ways and stuff like that.
Okay. Yeah, no, definitely have a shot.
I'm gonna write that down.
Howard should be here somewhere. You guys keeping busy? Yes.
Yeah. Keep busy. You know, I have to say, actually, with the transition, we didn't know what the government wanted to do with secretary. So in December, I didn't schedule it until January.
I live here getting caught up on everything from a whole like 2.5 months. Yeah. Don't tell anyone. Yeah.
Now they're filling up my schedule.
Yeah.
It's like, I can't ride my bike there. It works out so because I'm not allowed to keep the state truck over there because there's no place to lock it off. So it's downtown. So I just ride back home. It's defeating the purpose.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. First of all, thank you all for coming. My name is Grant Cope. I'm Deputy Secretary for Environmental Policy here at CalEPA. We've got a good, solid panel to quickly run through some of the actions that are being taken at the state, regional, and local level on organic materials management issues. So we will want to dive right in. Let me go through some logistics first. Obviously, refreshments are over here, food, coffee, whatever you'd like. There's restrooms. Men's are located directly outside, women at the end of either hall. If the fire alarm goes off, lights start flashing, just follow us out, and we'll end up in Cesar Chavez Park and then continue the discussion. In terms of, here, could you pass me that, please? We're also doing, just in case, simultaneous Spanish translation. So if anybody needs a headset, it's over in the back left part of the room, right over there, hand up. And then similarly online, there's both an English audio and a Spanish audio. So you'll be able to speak fluently either way. If it's in Spanish, it will be translated into English here, and vice versa. So I'm going to give this a try. So the purpose of today's listening session is really just to broadly discuss some of the activities and policies that are being undertaken by government right now on organic materials management. But the main thrust of today's listening session is just that. It's to listen to you, to get the public input on what types of policies you want to see pursued. What types of activities do you think regional, state, local people should be taking in order to help make better decisions and make more expeditious decisions? We've got an agenda today where we'll spend about 35 minutes talking through those established actions and policies. And then we'll spend about 40 minutes receiving public input. Guidelines are over here, just in terms of having a fulsome discussion. If anybody has a question at any point too, please just raise your hand. We can answer it, or if we can't answer it today, we'll commit to get back to you with an answer. On that, we're going to have somebody taking notes during the public input section. Karishma, I don't.
She's not there yet.
Okay. So somebody will be up here kind of taking down the main thrust of what the suggestion or recommendation or question is. And then we'll take basically 10 minutes at the end to try and synthesize some of the main themes that we got from the public input. Anybody have any questions on that? Okay, great. So the comment cards, go ahead and write your comments on them. It can be either a direct statement or a question. Please give them to Bonnie. And if you don't want to write them down, if you'd rather just say what your question is, we've got 2 microphones. So go ahead and just raise your hand, and during the public input part, we will give you a microphone. So, thank you. So in terms of the benefits of what we're trying to do today, I tried to just summarize them in 3 different points. One is obviously we're helping to lead the nation in fighting climate change. I think a really good example of that is SB 1383 that CalRecycle, and in particular Hank, is working on to address short-lived climate pollutants, in particular methane. The second is we're really reshaping the way in which the fifth largest economy in the world is dealing with using and reusing valuable resources while reducing waste, which is just, it's a tremendous effort, but it carries with it tremendous benefits. You know, if a goal is zero waste in society, which I think is a perfectly good goal to have, these are all important steps to try and achieve something like that. And then lastly, we're trying to build a more sustainable economy and make investments through policies and actions that will create good jobs, not just, you know, in urban centers, but also in rural areas. Both of those are extremely important. So, whoops, I was trying to click off. We're gonna jump in right now. I'm gonna ask people to introduce themselves, and then we're gonna start with Larry with CalEPA in terms of giving the presentations. If you could all just introduce yourself, starting with Larry, and then.
Okay. I'm Larry Green. I'm the interim director at CalEPA, California Air Pollution Control Officers Association.
Hank Brady, I'm the implementation manager for CalRecycle on our implementation of SB 1383.
Hi, I'm Jenny Lester Moffett, Undersecretary at the Department of Food and Agriculture.
I'm Brianna St. Pierre. I'm a senior geologist with the State Water Board's Division of Water Quality.
Tom Smith, Forest Pest Management Specialist with CAL FIRE.
And then Larry's going to kick it off.
All right. Thank you all for being here. Just the right sized room, I think. It's pretty amazing after all the discussions we had. Representing the air districts in California, as I said, I'm here. I'm the interim director. I have two folks in the room, Errol Villegas, who's from San Joaquin, and Alan Abbs from the Bay Area, who are here helping to support and answer questions if people have questions that are particularly pertinent to their district areas. Air districts have been strong participants for quite a while in the working groups addressing organic materials. There's been a tremendous discussion between the various state agencies because there's a real jurisdictional overlap here, and all of these have to be checked to make this process move forward. And we've also worked with our partners at the Air Resources Board very closely. Air districts implement local rules and state and federal requirements. We have the responsibility for doing the local rules that support the state and the federal government, and we're the people who have to make sure that the state and federal requirements are implemented in our permits. New and updated organic materials operations must fit within those rules. Some key elements of the program: generally, new and updated facilities will need an air quality permit. Before districts can issue permits, land use approval and CEQA process generally must be completed, and that's done most often by a city or county. Emissions from transportation of materials, NOx from trucks and other mobile sources have to be addressed in the CEQA land use approvals, regional and community impacts. Permitting requirements and stringency or requirements is related to the attainment and non-attainment status of the various district or where the facility is located. So there will be differences across the state in the stringency of the rules that are required to be met. Generally, there's a requirement for a no net increase of non-attainment pollutants. So if you're non-attainment for a particular pollutant, you can't increase those. You have to some way offset those, and there's a range of different ways that can be done. Often, VOC offsets are required, and netting out any increases from the proposed new installation. While odors and nuisance typically for composting facilities are not items that the air districts are allowed to cover, we're still the first place that odors and nuisance complaints come to, and we're often involved in the resolution of those. So we're very sensitive to that particular aspect of the operations, and even though we wouldn't necessarily be permitting that, we would be working with the facility to try to ensure that isn't an impact on the public. Organics processing facilities should be sited in the region generating the organic material. In other words, we don't like to see situations where we're trucking from the north to the south in the state just because we're getting around permitting requirements. You have long transportation impacts there from the transportation, the trucks and other ways you move that material. So we support the idea that you try to put the facilities close to where you're generating the organics. And that's what I have to say about the air districts, and I'll pass it on to our next presenter.
Thanks. Again, my name is Hank Brady. I'm the implementation manager for CalRecycle on 1383. I'm going to focus on the targets in the statute as well as some of the benefits in the rulemaking process. First, I did want to recognize and thank CAPCOA and the Air Resources Board for some of their work with CalRecycle on identifying issues to resolve with air district permitting for new organic waste recycling facilities. We know that new facilities are going to be necessary in order to meet the SB 1383 organic waste reduction targets, and I'll talk about those in just a minute. Many of those may potentially be necessary in non-attainment air districts, and that's part of why we work with CAPCOA and ARB on the compost white paper to identify some of those issues, because they're going to vary from district to district how VOCs are mitigated in order for those facilities to be permitted. Shifting to 1383, the statute requires the state to reduce the organic waste disposal by 50% by the year 2020 and 75% by the year 2025. And those are both tied to a 2014 baseline. The statute also requires the state to improve or increase edible food recovery by 20% by 2025. So that's kind of folded into that 75% reduction requirement. To give some context, that translates to about 20 million tons of organic waste that's currently disposed that needs to be recycled by the year 2025. And it requires the state to more than double the organic waste recycling infrastructure in California. The legislation specifically required CalRecycle, in coordination with the Air Resources Board, to develop and adopt regulations that are designed to achieve those targets, and for those regulations to take effect starting in 2022. We are currently in the formal rulemaking process, and we're actually in the formal comment period for the draft regulations, and I'll touch on that in a moment at the very end. But we are anticipating the formal rulemaking process to be completed in the next year, and to provide CalRecycle an opportunity to help educate and provide guidance to stakeholders for implementing the regulations in advance of the 2022 effective date. The regulations are designed to ensure that every California resident and business has access to organic waste collection and recycling services that would be provided to them by their jurisdiction and or their jurisdiction in conjunction with their hauler. The regulations are designed to increase compost application across the state through procurement standards and to increase edible food recovery. The benefits that we've calculated from implementing the regulations will result in 12,000 new green jobs in the recycling industry for recycling and composting organic waste, about 17 billion in economic activity generated from the new organic waste recycling activities. And the overall impetus of the statute, as Grant had mentioned, is fighting climate change. So reducing the disposal of organic waste and recycling 20 million tons will result in significant greenhouse gas reductions in California. That will be permanent greenhouse gas reductions moving forward. While the benefits are significant, there are challenges to developing new organic waste recycling facilities, and the regulations have attempted to reflect that, and the department has acknowledged that as well. One of the things that we find is critical and that we've attempted to insert into the regulations is the need for community input in developing new organic waste recycling facilities. With CalRecycle's greenhouse gas reduction funds for new and expanded facilities, we have required applicants to have consultation with local impacted communities. In the new organic waste recycling regulations that the department is currently implementing or designing to implement 1383, the requirement for operators to consult with impacted communities 180 days prior to issuing a new to initiating the permitting process and for local permitting agencies to hold public meetings within a mile of communities that will be impacted by the facilities. These efforts are designed to help ensure that these facilities can be built with sufficient community input, but also to avoid issues down the line where people aren't aware of an issue with the facility until too far down the process. So just quickly on our rulemaking process, we are in a comment period. So if folks want to provide comments on the rulemaking, the comment period ends on March 4th, and we will have a formal public hearing on March 12th to take comments on the regulations. But that's at 5:25, so just over my time there. So I'll hand it over to Jenny.
Am I next?
Yep.
Okay. Well, I'll get started on a couple things while my slide deck gets up. One thing, so I'm with the Department of Food and Agriculture. Our charge at the department is to protect and promote agriculture in California. And I think especially for this conversation, it's some of the protection and the work that we're working on in agriculture in California related to organics management. We are active on two different areas. One is on the demand side. Certainly there are 9 million acres of irrigated cropland in the state. There's some opportunities certainly for the demand side for crops to be able to continue to increase compost application in cropping systems, being mindful of things like nutrient management, nutrient quality. I have Dr. Martin Berger here, who is an expert on that. So we do labeling on compost and other nitrogen management and fertilizers. But we also are working on, through the Healthy Soils Initiative, some of the, we have financial incentives, we have policy practices, and we have research that we're doing through Healthy Soils on all different soil management practices. Of course, compost is part of that. Before I get into the Healthy Soils Initiative, I also wanted to talk, because there is conversation on SB 1383, and we play another large role in SB 1383 on the dairy side. So 1383 also requires that we reduce methane by 40% from our dairy operations here in California. So that's a pretty big charge for dairies here in California. Dairies produce 20% of our nation's milk, and so there's specifically on the methane reduction side, it's focused on manure management. So as we talk about organics management, there's a lot of opportunity with manure and manure management. Last year, actually the past 2 years since the legislation passed, the department, along with the Air Resources Board, the Public Utilities Commission, and the Energy Commission partnered together, and we had working groups. We have a couple chairs of our working groups in the back of the room. We had 3 different working groups, one on dairy digesters, one on what we call alternative manure management. It means manure management on anything but digester operations, and then a last one on research. And so there's a lot of focus on, certainly on digester technology for manure management, but at the same time, we also have funding, and we also have a lot of focus on manure management for composting. So there's a lot of opportunity as we're thinking about organics management in the state. How do we take on all these different organic materials and create compost that is available in different forms that are interesting and needed for agriculture? On the Healthy Soils Initiative, this was launched in 2015 by Governor Brown. And it charged the department, along with all of our sister agencies, to work together on finding solutions to really increase healthy soils and throughout the state, both in agriculture and then also in other areas, certainly through our public lands, as well as in agriculture, privately managed lands. We received in 2016 $7.5 million for our Healthy Soils program. So the first part, going back to this kind of 3-legged stool that we have with our Healthy Soils Initiative, one is on financial incentives. So we received $7.5 million in 2016. That first round of funding, we funded about 8,600 acres of land that was in Healthy Soils practices, 112 projects. Of those projects, as you can see the pie chart there, 67 projects included compost application. If you add up all the numbers, of course, it adds up to more than 112. And I think that's a critical part to all of it, is that there's not just one thing that a farmer is looking to do when they're putting healthy soils practices in, and when they're thinking about it, it's a whole system. And I think that's a really important part. So compost in addition to cover crop, or compost in addition to other practices, are a really key part of what farmers are looking for when they're implementing healthy soils projects on their farm. We have another $15 million that we're currently we have an RFP out for. So those are due March 8th. And so we're right now receiving applications, and we'll continue to receive applications from farmers and ranchers, both for demonstration projects and then also for direct farmer incentive projects to put and install these practices directly onto their farm. The other part is research and extension. One is through a farm demonstration network. We know from a lot of history and a lot of information out there that farmers share information and really advance practices through farmer-to-farmer networks, farmer-to-farmer information sharing. So this farm demonstration network is a key part of that, and it's a partnership between Cooperative Extension, USDA, NRCS, UC Davis, the California Association of Resource Conservation Districts, and the Farm Bureau, and it's really to support adoption of practices in the whole suite of healthy soils practices, which of course includes compost application. The other part is also on targeted research, so looking at all the different practices and what does it mean for water quality, water holding capacity, what does it mean for integrated pest management or pest solutions, all of those different things. And then the last of the three-legged stool that we have is on policy solutions. So really looking at what are we doing across the state to support organics management. That's, I think, this conversation here. So that's part of the solution. But then also thinking about, and in conversations with folks like the water boards, what does compost application, what does cover crop, what does all these different practices mean when we think about our irrigated lands regulatory program. And then the same thing with integrated pest management, same thing with air quality, dust mitigation. What do all those practices mean related to all of our other policies, and how can we as state agencies align our policies in a way that we're supporting those practices that are being implemented on the farm? So that's the last of the three-legged stools that we've been working on. This picture here, I think, is a really good example of that collaboration. This was from a little over a year ago, and we had a Healthy Soils Week here in the state. And it was a partnership with all of our agencies, and we did different things. Cat Recycle did a compost drop that week. We had a farmer panel talking about the practices that they're working on and the stories that they told to their legislators. We did an urban farm demonstration project as well, so really showcasing throughout the state where we're really starting to implement, reaching out to the public and to legislators as well. So really education campaign as well is a key part of that. Partnerships for all of the things that we're doing on climate smart agriculture, which includes healthy soils, those are key. So really just being mindful of all of those different partners that we have is something that that we've started to focus a lot more on, and focused a lot more through the climate summit that was this fall, bringing together especially the supply chain through that all. We know that we can drive practices and drive change through policy. We can also drive change through the supply chain, through companies that are purchasing products, and encouraging farmers to implement practices through that purchasing power. That's all I've really got there. This is just the Global Soil Health Partnership that we launched at the Climate Summit, and we'll continue to really elevate the work on soil health that we're doing here in California, deeper into California, but then also throughout the globe as well. And that's it. So Brianna is going to go next.
I was waiting.
I'll do the introduction.
So I'm Brianna St. Pierre. I'm with the State Water Board Division of Water Quality, and one thing I really wanted to highlight to start off with was things that we're doing internally. We actually did a reorg within our division to group together our organics management programs. Whereas these used to be separate programs, we brought together our land disposal, composting, biosolids, and agriculture programs into one unit because we needed to further enhance our own internal communications and make things more efficient that way. High priority projects that we're working on standardized terms and conditions, plain spoken language, some online tools to really help everyone with especially composting, develop maps, and implementation of our compost order. Our compost order was developed to support 1383 and the Healthy Soils Initiative to have standardized requirements statewide. Before the compost order was developed, the regions were developing orders that may have different conditions. It took a really long time to write individual orders, and so this was really done to help streamline that permitting process. We realized that there were some issues when this was implemented, and we recognized that. So the way that one example of things we're trying to remedy is our agricultural exemption. The way the compost order is written now, dairies can compost on a dairy and spread it out to their own property, and an orchard, for example, can compost on their own property and just apply it to their property, but they can't share material in between, and that really wasn't our intent. We really wanted to bring it all together, and so we're working to modify the agricultural exemption so that dairies and other agricultural entities can share that material and apply it to their fields. Some other things that we're working on is developing guidance documents for our general compost order. These are available now. These are on our GeoTracker webpage, and they are very detailed instructions on how to get a facility into GeoTracker to comply with the requirements of the compost order. One thing that we are working on right now, and it's almost done, is a tool so that someone can go and answer a series of questions and figure out what tier they may fall into, and this has standard language not just for water boards permitting but also CalRecycle's permitting, and at the end of this the person can then apply directly to the regional water board or to the local enforcement agency. This isn't ready yet, but it will be hopefully soon. We've developed maps, and this is available now on our GeoTracker website to show locations of different compost facilities. So if people wanted to take material to a facility, it's there and available. They can easily look up where the nearest facility is. And we are continuing to report on implementation of our compost order. The latest report was published in October, and it is available on our website. And that's pretty much all I have.
Okay, great.
You don't have this.
I don't need that. I'm Tom Smith with the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, and we're kind of a late addition to this whole thing. We're mostly thought of as a potential end user for compost and organic materials, but to be perfectly honest, we don't actually use that much in forestry. If you plant the right tree on the right site, it usually grows fairly well. So we're not big users, but we do have some concerns and some uses. Among our uses, after wildfires, we do use some organic material, some mulching and composting, mostly for soil stabilization and for protecting waterways. It's not a huge use. We use it on slopes that are erodible, where there's been some high soil burn severity, where erosion is not too steep. If it gets too steep, it's just going to wash away, so we don't want to do that. And where the soils are highly erodible and where there may not be too much rainfall that would wash things away afterwards. But we do have a concern about putting too much organic material out in the fields. We've just been through a couple of our worst fire years ever. The more organic materials out there, the more things may burn. So that is a concern that we have. Main reason I was put on this is I'm the forest pest management specialist, and we are concerned about the movement of both native but particularly exotic insects, diseases, weed seeds around the state. And organic material is a great way of moving things. We've had some exotic pests moved around in such things as firewood, wood chips, and the like. Generally, if we're dealing with compost, it's not a problem. The composting process is going to destroy just about anything. But there are some concerns about larger material, and there are concerns about moving things to composting facilities, that you may be moving things from an infested area to that composting facility and around there. So we're looking at trapping around composting facilities in order to just be an early warning system that something may have been moved there. And our biggest thing is not moving things any great distance. Not only are there the costs from the environmental standpoint of just the physical moving of it, but the more chances you have of moving something you don't want into an area. And that's really all I have.
Okay. I'll just run through really quickly some of the recommendations from a report the CalEPA put out. Tom, could I grab that? The report contains roughly 20 recommendations on ways to both enhance and expedite decision-making on organic materials management. I'm going to highlight 3 today. First one is a permitting work group. This has been used both at the state and federal level in the past. It essentially takes high priority projects and gets a group of people like us and others together to focus on moving those projects through the decision-making process, anticipating where problems might come up, trying to address those problems as a way of arriving at a decision more expeditiously. Second, our community forums. This is really, once again, trying to front load the decision-making process on infrastructure. Reference back to Hank with 1383. By reaching out early and often to community members who are going to have infrastructure located in or near their cities, towns, et cetera, you can identify problems. You can educate the people about ways in which those problems could be addressed or develop new ways to address those problems. It essentially helps to smooth the decision-making process rather than allowing problems to pop up towards the end when there's a lot of investment in that decision already. And then third is online tools. It's a good way for providing a baseline level of information. I'd reference Brianna with GeoTracker and what they're doing. There are various ways that you can iterate that type of tool, however, and the report goes into more detail. But making certain that people have, the main point is to make certain that people have the knowledge that they need for both siting and permitting decision-making so that they're not going into kind of down a path without having kind of some light shown on those issues that they want to see. Oh, Tung. Hey, good. How are you? That's it for me. Tung, do you want to take a couple minutes to talk through ARB, or?
Yeah, I mean, I can. Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, just a couple of minutes to talk about. First of all, I'm very sorry I'm late. Got into someone rear-ended my truck on the way over here. Everyone's okay. They hit my trailer hitch. So their car was totaled. My trailer hitch has a scratch on it. So from ARB's perspective, composting operations are a really critical and key part of our short-lived climate pollutant strategy. As you know, SB 1383 has some goals in it to reduce methane emissions 40% by 2030. And so as a large part of that strategy, one of the things we've identified in there is landfill diversion work. A lot of that organic material needs to be processed in another way rather than in a landfill. So we believe that composting operations are a pretty critical component of that. And so, knowing that though, composting operations themselves do have some impacts on the environment and the local communities. And so we've been working with the air districts, with CalRecycle, with CalEPA, and all the other folks at the table here with me to make sure that those impacts are addressed. If there are impacts, that we make sure that they're mitigated. We put together a composting white paper, I think some of my colleagues have probably spoken about before I came here, to identify some of the best practices, some of the best available control technology measures that we could put into place to make sure that those composting operations maximize the environmental benefits that we could realize from them. by minimizing the amount of emissions that come from them, by minimizing the potential community impacts. We feel that composting operations could go a long way towards, helping the state realize its climate goals and at the same time protecting community health.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, now really for the most important part of the listening session. We've got two different microphones. If you could just raise your hand, they'll be brought around to you. And then you can ask it generally of anybody up here or of individuals. And then Michelle will take down kind of the concept that you're asking about, and let's have at it. If you could begin by just saying who you are and who you're affiliated with.
To speak into this? Whoa, what's
That's so that people online can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's so that people online can hear you. So just talk regularly. Yeah.
I understand now. This is Chuck White with Manat, Phelps, and Phillips. It's an issue that I've been wanting to see if the time is right for further discussion, and that has to do with organic waste that is generated in the urban environment. And there's an opportunity possibly under the regs that Hank is working on, the 1383 regs, to allow for verified technologies to be approved that would result in just a reduction in landfill disposal. And that could include some advanced technologies that heretofore have been discouraged for the most part. For example, there's a company called Fulcrum Energy that is doing a gasification project in Reno, but they're making airplane fuel, low-carbon airplane fuel to send back to California under the low-carbon fuel standard. They gave up trying to site it in the facility in California because of the restrictions and limitations that are in the Public Resources Code that end up basically classifying that kind of technology as a form of disposal, otherwise as transformation. So I'm wondering if there's interest in a broad band of stakeholders across the spectrum to having a workshop or more detailed discussion on the idea, is the time right, given the China sword, given these very aggressive recycling goals, given the lack of facilities in California, the fact that residual waste is increasing actually, because in order to get compost and plastics and everything processed to the point that they can enter the market, you generate a lot more residual waste that is made up a large part of organics, but it's got some contaminants in it. That's actually a very good source for conversion technologies, for gasification, for pyrolysis, for using fuels in industrial furnaces to make it a low carbon fuel. And the idea would be you got to produce a low carbon fuel, energy, or chemical. You got to show that you're going to have a net decrease in greenhouse gas emissions as a result of converting that fuel. You'd have same or less toxic air contaminants. You'd have same or less criteria pollutants, and you'd have a variety of other potential benefits. But you'd want to call it something other than disposal under the Public Resources Code. You want to call it recycling or recovery or something that wouldn't be considered disposal, to encourage local governments and investors to invest in this kind of technology to provide these kinds of services for these residual wastes that are being generated all over California, and they're increasing. So that's my question is, CalEPA grant, are you interested in helping convene a discussion? I've talked to Kip Lipper. He said he'd be happy to talk about, have a conversation on that. My Assemblywoman, Cecilia Aguilar-Curry, where I live in Davis, has expressed interest. In fact, she is talking about running a bill to require a greater organics strategy for the state of California that could include components like this. So I'm hoping that we can have a discussion, not a decision today or tomorrow, but somewhere down the road, to allow these kinds of technologies to help California reduce its greenhouse gas emissions and reduce its residual organic waste. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll just take a stab at that, but then maybe if Tong and Hank can chime in. Yeah, advanced technologies are completely on the table. They do have to comply with all public health, all environmental safeguards. So long as there are pathways for their legitimate use in a protective way, that's absolutely on the table. We were having an earlier discussion about, and I don't know, maybe you want to take a second and just go over them, but we were having a discussion today about two types of technologies that today are being used to help convert organic material. So I'd say absolutely more discussion and more action on it is good. But Hank, Tong, do you guys want to?
Sure. From the perspective of the department in terms of implementing the 1383 regulations, I mean, I think there's two parts to your question slash comment. Is the time ripe for a discussion with changing the public resources code? We'd have to defer. That's kind of a conversation that needs to take place in the legislature. As it relates to implementing the regulations for SB 1383, the primary focus is removing material from landfills and reducing greenhouse gas reductions. So to the extent that a new technology can reduce greenhouse gas reductions and results in material not going to a landfill, for the 1383 regulations, it could be considered a reduction in disposal. That doesn't change the existing permitting requirements. Any of those facilities would still be subject to local permitting that's applicable. So, but as it relates to 1383, we've worked with the Air Resources Board to develop some regulatory standards where those types of facilities could be considered recovery for the purposes of 1383, provided that they're in compliance with local standards and reducing greenhouse gas emissions.
Thank you, Grant. I'll take you up on that. I won't name company names, but I will say that I'm pleased to say that we have technologies, thermal technologies for conversion of agricultural residuals and manures that have now passed both the South Coast Air Board's most stringent standards and also with San Joaquin Valley's APCD, so that all across the board, non-detect is possible, and these tools are at community scale, so they can be placed near their sources, so right on target for where we are. It's been a hard decade, but the technologies have advanced during this time as well, and now we're ready to implement. I come at this from the financing, project finance side. My interest is in stabilizing and understanding the feedstock in particular, so that we can show that we actually have financeable projects. But certainly being able to pass the standards for the air boards is crucial. If we couldn't get past that step, we wouldn't have a project. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dan Noble, the Association of Compost Producers. I have a number of comments, but I'll just do a few to begin with, and if there's any more time, I don't know if you're going to take comments in writing or how that's going to work.
We've got the, if you want to do them here, we've got the cards.
I mean, other than just the verbal for the time that we have.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah. Okay. Relative to the community forum idea, all of you, I think pretty much all of you on the panel or people in your organizations have participated in up through the 13th annual California Bioresources Alliance. So under the notion of doing a continued community forum, we would love the group that's been organizing that on a volunteer time for the last 13 years, headed up by U.S. EPA Region 9, and including the Water Board, and occasionally, CalRecycle and the Air Board, as well as CDFA. We would love to, this year, get a MOU signed where all of the agencies are working together with industry, because most of the people in the audience, I think, are from industry or local jurisdictions. So we see that bioresources management is going to be needed in perpetuity, and that's not just, of course, municipal, but including some things that you've already mentioned, with certainly the ag residuals and soils, healthy soils, as well as now with the fire management, CAL FIRE, and fuel management throughout the state, which impacts local markets. So we've already had some preliminary discussions with PG&E, and they view the fuel as a liability. We view it as a resource, but it's only a resource when it's used beneficially and doesn't flood markets, but actually builds markets. So ACP is going to sign on to the MOU with the rest of you, if that's possible, because I'm just putting it out there in the public forum to do that. And so regarding Association of Compost Producers, we, this year, are putting forth a public organics, in our case, compost and mulch marketing plan, as well as an internal plan for the members of our association. And we want to make sure that those plans are consistent from the state all the way down to the local level in the various regions. And we're dividing the regions up according to the water board regions based on watershed protection and the connection between organics and bioresources and the water industry. As most of you may know, 90% of the water that we manage in our state is put on soil to grow things. 80% is ag, and half of the 20% goes to landscapes. So obviously bioresources come from water and solar energy, and then that also transacts the gases, of course, either producing oxygen or drawing down and sequestering CO2. So there is a need in perpetuity to be managing all of these resources across the board, not only from the state level, but certainly at the regional and then jurisdictional and then private sector. So we think that forum is incredibly important, and we can keep this dialogue going.
Could I ask just a quick follow-up? What's the purpose of the MOU?
The purpose of the MOU is to get all of the agencies to essentially create a forum that is on a regular basis, so that we can have these kinds of dialogues, not just an hour and a half, once a year. As you all know, we do 2 days once a year. Maybe that can fan out into an ongoing dialogue where we're workshopping these things with each other, with all the new ideas and all of that. So
Okay.
there's also a need for a consistent budget between all of these groups of agencies. Right now, we don't. It's all been volunteer up to now, and yet we're managing, millions of tons of resource per year. So it seems like it warrants more than just a volunteer effort by a few people.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yes.
Anybody else? There's a lot to talk about.
Good afternoon, Nick Office of Californians Against Waste. Just a couple minor quick comments. First of all, on specifically on the recommendations that have come out of the CalEPA report and that Tung touched on, it seems like there were some specific items in there that could be pursued legislatively. Things like netting would be potentially something that could significantly help reduce a permitting barrier while making sure that there are no emission increases. I'm wondering if there has been any talk about pursuing that legislatively, either at the CalEPA level or at the airport level. That's one question. The second question would be for Hank. In terms of AB 2411, which was passed last year, the McCarty bill, that requires use of compost in post-fire cleanup, but also in Caltrans. Has there been any schedule developed for rolling out that bill? I mean, there are a couple reports that are due at the end of this year. I believe CalEPA is taking the lead on those. When can we see that coming down the pipe? And then finally, just because I can't help myself in response to the waste energy comments, I think there's a little bit of talking past each other here. Gasification, pyrolysis, biomass conversion, fuel production for woody material, for woody biomass, currently has diversion credit and RPS credit, and is eligible under the low carbon fuel standard. What is not eligible for diversion credit is solid waste conversion. And that's an intentional policy decision by the legislature, not an oversight in the way the public resources.
So I can respond to the second piece. I'm actually going to defer to Howard, is in the room with CalRecycle regarding the implementation schedule for 2411. And So yeah, so I'll hand it to Howard.
Just briefly on 2411, I will have to get back to you on exact timelines, but we have been reaching out to some of the agencies, CAL FIRE and others, and we do have plans to have some activities going on this year, but I don't have anything more specific in my head right now.
So to respond to Nick's question on the netting issue, the conversations that we've had so far with CAPCO and the air districts has been trying to explore the existing mechanisms within the district new source review programs to allow netting. So we believe that there is space and capacity there to get some of these projects on the ground using the existing netting mechanisms. As far as the legislative need for it, there have been some sort of preliminary discussions about that, but one of the considerations that we need to keep in mind is that California has SB 288 that really does bound how new source review rules and new source review programs can be modified. Certainly we are very cognizant and we're very understanding of the fact that this serves a greater public need and that there are a lot of benefits that we can realize from additional composting operation to help us meet our climate goals. But at the same time, we need to make sure that those criteria pollutant protections, those public health protections, those community protections stay in place. And that's what the new source review rules and SB 288 are designed to do. So certainly it's not out of the question, it's certainly not off the table, but it's something that we need to be very careful about if we want to go down that path. But for now, to answer your question, we are trying to work within the space of new source review programs, and we think that we can get there. But if there are any gaps that we identify down the road, then perhaps legislation could be a part of that.
Larry, did you want to add anything? No? Okay.
Well, just like Nick can't help responding to issues on waste energy, I can't help respond to Nick. And Nick's absolutely 100% correct. We're not talking past each other, but right now you can take pure biogenic material that is processed from the urban waste environment and use that to produce energy, fuels, and chemicals. No one argues with that. The problem is that in the case of MRF residuals, in the case of urban waste processing residuals, there's invariably some small percentage of plastics and other kinds of materials that are mixed in. And under a strict reading of existing regulations and statutory requirements, if you take that to produce an energy, fuel, or chemical that has anything other than pure biogenic materials, it's considered a form of disposal. And it seems to me that the proper place to evaluate the toxics and criteria pollutant emissions would be at the place where they're actually being used as a fuel or as a chemical or as a source of energy, and not just simply banning it because there happens to be a little small percentage of it. You'd have to meet or exceed existing standards for the use as a fuel. You'd have to meet or exceed existing standards for use as a source of energy, for example. And that is totally within the purview of not really CalRecycle, but other agencies like the air districts and the air board and others. And so I would like to see if there's willingness to have a conversation about opening up the use of some of these MRF residuals that can safely and effectively be used to produce low carbon energy, fuels, and chemicals, with keeping a mind's eye on criteria pollutants, toxic emissions, and other kinds of environmental concerns to make sure you're not having an increase over what would otherwise occur with the continued use of fossil fuels. So why isn't this a good idea that everybody can try to find a center point to be able to use? Because as I pointed out earlier, the residuals from the processing of solid waste is on the increase because you can't send it to China. And no one in the U.S. is going to take these materials unless it's cleaned to a very high degree, which results in a net increase in this residual, which can be processed. And it's not 100% biogenic, but it's a large percent biogenic to safely produce energy, fuels, and chemicals. Why not? Thank you, Nick.
Question for Jenny Moffett. So glad to see you here. I know the CDFA is working hard with fracking in particular on developing standards for use of char and how that fits within the context of compost and healthy soils. Can you speak to where we are in CDFA's development of standards for biochar and any projections as to when we might actually get a matrix of standards that we can go to market with?
Are you asking about standards for biochar from in our fertilizing materials program or in our healthy soils program, or both?
Actually both, because there's an overlap there.
Right.
Loading biochar with NPK takes it into one program. Straight biochar in the healthy soils is different applications. We're looking at a matrix of material to process to application standards then that I know are moving forward, but I don't know where we stand.
I'm looking to Martin to see if Martin has an answer on that one. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Martin Berger, fertilizing registration. So we have a category where we register biochar, that's auxiliary soil and plant substances. And the main standard is that you have to disclose the feedstock and that it has at least 60% carbon in it. And we also register blended products, that if there are nutrients in it, like fertilizers, then it's a fertilizer. And so there is really a framework that this can go to the market.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Arthur Boone. I have a small business called Center for Recycling Research. Represent the Measure D Committee from Alameda County. We enacted an initiative, got the voters to approve this in 1990, which basically raises funds to support recycling activities through a landfill surcharge. The thing that I'm most concerned about is the absence of good hard science on the questions of methane capture. The Cal report, the CalEPA report, which took the number of 75% of the methane in a landfill gets captured by existing gas capture systems. There's no scientific background for that number. It's a guesstimate done by bureaucrats in Washington, very much influenced by the existing landfill industry. What we do know is that 60% of all the methane that comes out of food materials is gone within 6 weeks of deposition, long before any gas capture systems are in place. That was much of the energy that led to the adoption of SB 1383, and it seems to me that everybody who wants to do mixed waste processing or any other kind of way to equivocate the simple fact of what they're doing in Europe, essentially in 2024, source-separated organics will be the rule of all 26 countries, and that's going to be the way they're going to manage this. We have not gotten, we are currently on a path to do exactly what Europe did 20 years ago, and we're going to make a lot of mistakes. We're going to waste a lot of money building facilities that aren't going to work very well, and the sooner we realize that, the better off we are. Thank you.
I'm Neil Edgar with California Compost Coalition. I would ask a couple of things. In the broad sense of this whole program is looking at how are we managing organic waste and doing so to create circular economies around organic materials. And fundamentally that means we're returning the vast majority of those materials back to the soil where those wastes were grown. Some of it landscape, but by far the largest portion of it is in agriculture. So I would ask CAPCOA to take a broader look at what they're asking when they're talking about having facilities located in proximity to where the generators are. Those materials were really generated in the farm fields of California, transported into urban centers, and then the waste material now needs to be returned back to those same soils where it was produced. And having access to markets means in many cases those facilities need to be located near the markets and not necessarily near the point of generation of the waste. So it is a little bit short-sighted if we're only looking at putting facilities in urban centers next to the generators. Compost facilities typically need to be within 50 miles of the market that they distribute to. So that 50-mile radius around a composting facility is generally not conducive to siting those operations in urban environments. Another part of Brianna's discussion about the ways that they're looking at changing the guidelines around agricultural exemptions, I would just ask that some consideration be made to the scale of those operations, how much materials can be transferred, what kinds of operations are going to be sited on those agricultural sites, and what kind of water quality protection measures, air quality protection measures are going to be employed. Because certainly the commercial composters I represent are investing millions of dollars in meeting these new higher standards, and don't have a problem doing so, but again, don't want to have markets and pricing undercut by facilities who aren't required to meet the same sort of environmental standards. I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah. So that's a good point, and I think that what we're talking about here is going to the CEQA analysis. And can the CEQA analysis look at what you're going to do with the material afterwards? Not just the transport from where it's generated to where you're going to compost it, but then what you're going to do with it. And that's a good question, and we'll take that back and look at that. I think that was the point that the air districts are interested in, is if you have to count the transportation piece and add that to the cost, if you will, the environmental cost of the product, then then you have that could be a big number. But if there's some way to subtract from that big number by then looking at what you do with it, then that might be helpful.
Can I follow up on that? And one of the things I think a lot of the projects that we work on doing permitting, it would be really helpful if the air districts were engaged in that CEQA process. In many cases, the CEQA documents are distributed, but depending on staffing levels, at times, they may or may not, the air district may or may not comment on them. However, during the permitting process, which is typically years later, then the air district has concerns about what occurred during the CEQA process, and that maybe not all the air quality impacts were firmly assessed, and in some cases has caused new CEQA, supplemental EIR, that kind of activity. So having that early engagement, I think, is a key element to getting air quality improvements.
As a former air pollution control officer, I completely concur with that comment. That is one of the problems that we have, is we often see projects at a time where they've made decisions, or you're right, we have to relook issues that should have been relooked the first time, and they're a lot less costly to do it when we're involved early. So that's a good comment to make too, that we'll take down.
We are considering that.
A lot of times it's the local jurisdictions, though, where that problem is. It's not the state. It's where the project comes in at the county or the city or wherever. Are they engaging the air district and the other agencies that are going to have to pass on this project or have pieces of the project down the road? If they're all part of it up front, you can get economy of scale by doing that work early in the project, and that's very helpful to projects when we're able to do that.
As project proponents, we now pretty much insist, and we'll reiterate to the local air district, we need your feedback on this to make sure we do it once and do it right.
Sorry, I was commenting on the water board portion of it, where we are considering everything that you've brought up in your comment, but I also want to reiterate that it's really important, not just for the air pollution control districts, but for any project that's looking to get started, consult with your local agencies, whether it's your LEA or your regional water board or your local air pollution control district, to consult early in the process before any of those decisions are made or before those major investments are made, so that you're not having to change things after your CEQA is done. Early consultation is absolutely critical.
Yes, Larry Sweetser on behalf of rural counties. A number of years ago, CalRecycle did a program EIR for anaerobic digesters, and that helped a number of jurisdictions cite and speed up the process as well as the cost of developing those facilities. A number of years ago, we also asked about expanding that to other types of things, particularly composting facilities. And some people have taken the environmental document for 1383 as being a program EIR I'm sure there's parts of it that can be, but that might be something that will help. I mean, time is short to develop these facilities, and the more tools we can have to do that would be very helpful, because that would hopefully address a lot of the multi-agency requirements and the roadblocks we run into.
I can respond to that. For the 1383 rulemaking, we are doing an environmental impact report, which is programmatic in nature and design. We are focused on ensuring that the EIR meets the legal standards for ensuring that the regulations can be approved, but we're very cognizant of the fact that to the extent that the EIR can analyze other issues that would be helpful for the development of additional facilities, that will only help us in achieving 1383's targets. But we do have limited resources, but that's certainly something we're focusing on. But our first priority is ensuring that the EIR is sufficient in order to meet legal standards for the regulations to be approved. But to the extent that we can, as you open up the hood and you're looking at those things, to the extent that we can identify those issues on a programmatic level for new facilities, we certainly want to.
Hey, could you go into when you anticipate beginning the process with 1383 in terms of soliciting input on the EIR?
Yes, so we conducted actually 2 scoping meetings on the environmental impact report. That was to solicit feedback on the scope of issues that we intend to cover in the environmental impact report. We are currently negotiating with a potential contractor for completing the environmental impact report, but we do plan in concurrent to the rulemaking process to hold a workshop on the draft EIR, probably in the June timeframe, but it kind of depends on how a couple things shake out, but definitely midway this year.
Thank you. Michael Giroux. We have a lot of incentive programs for transport vehicles swapping out for clean fuels right now through the various airports. I would ask that you look at the potential to swap out the vehicles that carry the feedstock. Because when you look at the overall LCA in developing our infrastructure, you've got trucks that can go out twice in a day, trucks that can go out once a day. That defines 2 radii for bringing materials back to the plant. Much of the emissions of the overall process then depend, when you have a clean technology in the middle, your LCA shows that it's transport leg that causes problems, and those legs go through our disadvantaged communities in many cases. So I would ask that we take a look at expanding our vehicle swap-out programs and incentives for the transport to switch to green fuels, both as an offtake for those green fuels in our own communities and as a mechanism to lower the overall LCA that we need to do for the infrastructure implementation we're talking about.
Dan Noble, Association of Compost Producers and Noble Bioresources Incorporated. I wanted to just bring up the idea of a whole systems model for bioresource management. I'm not hearing that we have that here in this room, although many of us may have pieces of it in our head in terms of the way we work, regulatory or policy or business models or investments. We are moving from the old disposal economy to a zero waste or circular economy, and in my company we've developed a model that is based on the circular economy, that is composed of 7 individual but integrated markets, from collection to transport to tipping fees to property, technology, operations, finance, and then finally the bioproduct portfolio. All of those are integrated in local markets, meaning that if you do anything in one part of that marketplace, because it's a whole system, it's going to affect other parts of that marketplace. So and that has to do, of course, primarily with materials management, but also materials purity, and then the different phases of those of those materials, whether it be gas, solid, or liquid, or aqueous in terms of water. So that's a complex model, but each of us doing our business, whether it be in collections, transport, tipping, processing, or eventual product use, we're all using individual pieces of that model. So I would argue that we should put forth a model like that, and then it becomes a framework for collecting and managing our data so that we can move data from one part of the biocycle to another. And again, this is all happening at the microeconomic level, at the facility level. It's happening at what I like to call the mesoeconomic level, which is really local economics or municipal materials management. And certainly it's happening at the macroeconomic level because every city and business has to deal with national and international markets. So I would put that on the table as something we should all aspire to. And then within that, the whole data collection aspect of both collecting the data from the operational and regulatory databases, as well as that moves into the financial databases and the CapEx and OpEx calculations that are made, as well as life cycle assessments. And then finally, what is the market benefit? Both financial markets as well as, I guess you could say, environmental or beauty markets, if you will, in the sense of biodiversity, carbon accounting, water economics. All of those are integrated in the bioeconomy. And I think it would be great if we had a consistent model in data collection. So we need to have a dialogue around this, in my opinion.
Dan, can I ask a quick follow-up?
Yeah.
When you say that a system to model for bioresources, are you thinking about, this is going to sound bad, but are you thinking more like a modular approach where we kind of draw out what processes each one of us respectively oversees or regulates, and then either sequentially or in some model-like approach, provide it to the public and to industry as a way of saying, here are the things that you should consider, here are the permitting actions, here's the data collection, et cetera. Are you thinking like a modular approach, or is it different?
Well, each of those facets, I guess you could say. I mean, the concept of a biocycle has been around for a long time. I mean, the industry publication that is our official publication, Biocycle, has been in publication for 60 years. So the concept of a biocycle is not anything new. What is new is that we're managing our local economies based on the old disposal economy. And I would submit to you and everybody in this room that the circular economy is actually a new economy. And we're all having to adapt to that. So I guess you could call them modules, but I would also call them aspects. Like collection is its own aspect. And that's the first place where waste gets sorted or not, and contamination. Then you have the transportation piece, which is how far is the generator from the processor, which was already discussed. Then you have how far, on the back end, how far is the processor from the marketplace, which has to do with transportation. So the biocycle is actually made up of 7 or more individual markets, all integrated. So the inputs of one is the outputs of one is the input of another, all the way around to putting the organics or the carbon back into the soil, and then all of us take food from that sink.
Right.
So while one big equation is too hairy for any of us to deal with, although there are academics who do life cycle analysis, and this is their stock and trade. For each individual within that, we're all operating from the same relative structure. Now, we can argue about whether that structure is accurate or missing the boat, but at least that's an argument we should be having. We're not even having that right now. So we're all different from disjointed data sets.
Gotcha.
Part of the vote again.
been some interesting developments recently. I don't know if you saw in the paper a couple of days ago. The building owners in San Francisco have said that they're going to have all their office buildings are going to be free of all carbonaceous fuels by the 2045. It's a big goal. The legislature a month or so ago put $1 billion on the table, as I understand it, to convert all the buses in California to electric motors. I believe that all carbonaceous fuels, whether it's made from renewable resources or any of that kind of jargon, are on the way out. That's the big message that's coming down. And all the attempts that we make to find a way to write these various fuels, these old liquid fuels made from these so-called wasted materials, I think is really a step in the wrong direction. Second thing, while I have your attention. About 5 or 6 years ago, the state enacted a law which said that it instructed the CalEPA to deal with to measure whether a program to be efficient would have to be comparable to source separation. I don't know if all of you are familiar with that phrase. It stuck away in the law about 5 or 6 years ago. So I think back at SB 32 regulations, how it's story better than I do. But that has never been defined. What is comparable to source separation? I believe the city of Palo Alto has over 90% of its organics coming in source separated between commercial material at home, commercial accounts, self-haul. Is that the standard? So Palo Alto, interestingly, also has 2 electric garbage trucks now, maybe the first in the state. Maybe we should get $1 billion from the legislature to convert all the garbage trucks in the state to electric motors. Well, why not?
Okay. Do you want to then? I just before we move on, I want to do a time check. We're nearing the 3 o'clock. I want to allow a little bit of time just to go through what some of the comments have said. So let's do 4 or 5 more questions.
Hi, my name is Kevin Drew. I'm with the City of San Francisco. Just following on from what Dan was saying, we've developed a circular local organic economy through our waste stream and our use of creation of compost and put it back in the fields. And we're trying to take a closer look, I think, as Dan was suggesting, at exactly what that does mean. We have adopted the goal at the GCAS of a 15% reduction in generation, and we're trying to understand how, if we can really keep all of our organics cycling back through the system over and over and over again, what does that do in a generation? How does that really affect what our consumption looks like in a city like San Francisco? And we see that every city has this local cycle happening. And I think that's what Dan was talking about with recognizing a bio cycle that's happening. So I just want to offer our assistance to the CalEPA and the agencies in any way that we can with the research that we're doing, and we'll obviously keep you appraised of it. It's part of our 0, 80, 100 roots climate goal for our entire city, and we want to be able to help explain that to the extent that we start to understand it. To tell you the truth, we need your help in understanding it. On another technical point, there's a loophole in the Public Resources Code regarding the compostable products that are made of fiber, that there's a loophole in the code where the definition of compostable products does not address fiber and paper products that may contain persistent non-compostable fluorinated chemicals that are making their way into the compost stream, and that's affecting our ability to have compostable products that are really compostable and effective in the soil. We just wanted to make that point that needs to be taken a look at. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Antoinette Stein. I'm Environmental Health Trust right now. I wanted to bring up the issue of best practices, and I heard Jenny speaking about tools and trying to put together to help cities and facilities fill out the required documents that's much needed, and in fact, I can speak to C&D, construction and demolition waste. We have a really good tool, Green Halo, that's used throughout the state, and something likewise would be useful for this process. It doesn't exist currently. There's no funding currently. So the question brought up before was about offsets. We're hearing that facilities will have to purchase offsets, and the question is on the environmental justice issues of those living around the facilities. If they just purchase offsets, it's not really addressing the neighborhood issues of air quality and emissions of odors, especially anaerobic digestion facilities that deal with digestate that then has to be moved to be matured and finalized. And in that process, it entails putting it in a truck and hauling it, and that changes for the air CalEPA. It sort of goes from a facility permit issue to a moving source, and I don't even think we have the current regulations to manage this at all, so it's just, you know, Wild West right now. And I wanted to speak to if anyone has ever gone to the milpitasodor.org site to see the 5 years of 3,000 complaints continuously that have come about by that community on this issue. And they have tried to put forth a bill, a legislative bill, to get a task force built to come up with best practices, because it's not a fatal issue. It can be dealt with if we had best practices that were followed. And so I would suggest that the offsets be purchased to be able to enable community benefits to those around these facilities. And one of the things that has been already established and used is community benefits agreements, but they cost money to make and to facilitate the community engagement. And I don't want to keep going on, but one of the really important elements of organics management is trying to change the behavior of our population. And that engagement involves education. And one of the key elements of this is putting composting into the community. Community composting is what we need, and for children and communities to learn about it, as well to have 3-bin systems in every school and public facility in which there's a green bin to put organics, which we don't have now. And so all of these things, I believe, should be addressed in what we're doing here today. And thank you so much. It's wonderful.
Courtney Brown, California Alliance for Community Composting. I'd just like to kind of follow off this last thing of the importance of the community level. When we're looking at the largest jurisdictions in the state, in urban areas that are able to manage and move this stuff in a hyper-local manner, we're talking about 29 million people that are going to serve as a very important voter base for passing any sort of initiatives that you guys are going to come up with in your agency collaboration, as well as ballot measures that will require funding a lot of these initiatives. And the community level is the first point of contact for actually reaching and building support for your measures. Also understanding what goes in a 3-bin system, being able to understand how to make good soil, and therefore the buy-in to making sure that these programs are as successful as possible. And so when you consider your regulations in your siloed departments, that there be increased coordination on what's happening at the community level. The online tools that was brought up by the water board in the general order, I saw the first level started at 500 cubic yards when you got to fill in your information. But CalRecycle actually looks at anything that's not permitted and smaller than that at the community level as 100 cubic yards. So cross agency coordination on these very small details about exactly what small scale composting means, what the clarifications are on the exemptions for those, either if it be from the Air and Resources Board on the level of VOCs per day. Right now I think that limit is at 2 pounds per day. As well as the methodologies for being able to collect, gather, and disseminate this information. Improvements in the methodologies that can show the differences in the environmental standards when you're doing this work at a small scale versus doing it at large municipal scales, and understanding that in that might come forward with a lot of information that small scale solutions can not only handle some of the total capacity of this material, but that it actually could possibly be done in a way that meets the goals of all of your interagencies. Thank you.
Okay, last one.
Music to my ears, Grant. Thank you. And thank you for having this meeting. Good afternoon, everybody. Matt Cotton, IWMC. I think it's incredibly impressive how far we've come. It's easy to forget that. I've been in this field for about 30 years, and the fact that are moving millions of tons into compost and out to agricultural fields is actually quite a huge accomplishment. Something that CalRecycle and their experts at the time didn't think could happen. So that's really good news. I have a really granular, I got two questions, I guess. Really, one's kind of granular for the Air Board guys. I had a chance to go to Shanghai recently and talk about, weirdly enough, food waste recycling and composting. But being in Shanghai, being in China generally really gives you a fresh appreciation for how hard you guys work and how important the work you do is. So don't take this as anti-regulatory at all. I was going to say it really opens your eyes. Mostly it really burns your eyes if you've been to China recently. But what I want to talk about, and I was in the room with South Coast in 2001. I've been tracking this process for a very long time, this whole idea of VOCs from composting. VOCs from biogenic materials. And Larry, you talked about, I don't agree with it, but you talked about trying to manage materials in the place where they're generated. How are these new materials, how are these new emissions, how is this new source review if these organic materials are going to generate VOCs, whether we compost them or not? In fact, arguably, a lot of them will generate more VOCs if we don't compost them. So I'd really like to, is there any possible way, this is really the dream grant of 1045, is there a way to take a fresh look at VOCs from biogenic emissions? I realize the ship has sailed. I realize we have a lot of rules. We've had a lot of people spend a lot of money. There was a brand new, one of the newest large commercial composting sites in California was built in Alameda County about a year ago. They spent over $1 million just in offsets. Now, Waste Management, very large company, they can barely afford that. That's a lot of money just to be able to do what you're required to do, what the state requires, what your jurisdictions want. I'm sure they'll be fine. That's a huge amount of money, number one. Number two, the process and the cost of monitoring VOCs at composting is phenomenal. $80,000 to $100,000 a pop. That's not a sustainable testing method. With Brianna's folks and Scott and the regional water board, at least we know what the rules are. We know what the testing is. It's expensive, but it's a lot easier to understand, and once we get the infrastructure built, the maintenance of that and the monitoring of that is way cheaper than $80,000 a pop. If it were, we couldn't do it. So I'm deeply concerned that given the costs and the fact that we're regulating biogenic VOCs, it would be really useful to re-examine that and see if this is if we're really achieving what we think we're achieving by regulating, especially not all composting, but specifically green waste composting, which is naturally occurring biogenic material in the same airship from which it's generated. I don't think anyone in their right mind would consider that a pollutant. I've been banging my shoe on that table since 2001 to no avail, but I think it's important. This would be a perfect forum to look at that and regroup. The U.S. Composting Council is now doing a research project. We funded a research project to look at better methods of trying to measure VOCs. There's not a lot out there. We're trying to help, but $80,000 a pop is a lot. This group has a real opportunity, maybe the biggest opportunity for environmental performance increases in California in the next 10 years would be to look at all the manure in the valley, which is an enormous source of nitrogen pollution. UC Davis has documented that in numerous studies. And the woody biomass. We're not burning as much biomass. The biomass plants are closing. We spent 2 days at an open burning forum in the valley, and it was clear that they have absolutely no solution to this. Putting those together in a healthy soil way to make products for agriculture and to improve healthy soils would be a fantastic win. But if we don't change the VOC rule and the way that those emissions, these new, allegedly new emissions, these biogenic, naturally occurring, always going to occur emissions, if we don't change that, that's never going to happen. So thanks for the time.
Either you or Tom want to?
We were just noting that to some degree, this is, if we could figure out a way to do that and not be conflicting with the Clean Air Act, that'd be great. So it's a good idea. That's been the biggest, the longest pole in the tent is how do we, with state regulations and 288, how do we deal with an issue like that when we're forbidden in state law to go against the Clean Air Act? So it's more of a federal, can we sort it out at the federal level? So
I appreciate that later, though. We seem to manage to do that with fuel economy standards. We found ways around it in other areas. Perhaps we can look at one for compost.
well, maybe we had authorities there already set, and we don't here.
Okay, I'm going to respect everybody's time. It's now 3:05. This was scheduled to end at 3. You guys are more than welcome to stay and talk, but I want to respect everybody's time, and thank you all for coming. Consistent with what the information we put out at the beginning, we're going to consolidate and summarize the notes, and then so long as you put your email down on the contact information, you'll be getting a summary of the notes. And we'll also discuss kind of next steps when we put that out. So please, there's lots of food here. Grab some food if you'd like. Stick around.
I just have one thing. So
Yeah.
people filled out comment cards. Are those going to be in the notes as well?
They've already, yeah, the questions were already asked.
Okay, perfect.
But yeah. But please also, if you have questions that weren't asked, go ahead and fill out the comments on cards and give them to Bonnie.
Yeah, just kind of went boink, boink. Sorry. It's like, okay. I was never a guest.
I know you're going to hit the ground running.
Yeah, it's like, that's green over there. She's a soft voice.
Thank you. Yeah, no problem. Good job.
Plastic, okay, really.
My call, interesting, I went to a fire, fire resilience seminar for Swallowbridge Concrete over in Sonoma County. And one of the conclusions of the 2-hour listening session was we need to build more.
Good to see you. Good to see you.
Residual fuel.
So that's been our issue. It's like our forest stands are overstocked.